Thank you. You may be seated. All right, your next question. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Spiegel, before we took the break, you were talking about the correlation between domestic abuse, heavy alcohol abuse, and cognitive disorders. Does the literature support your testimony on this?
Yes, the literature fully supports everything I just said through that interaction.
Thank you. Now, you indicated that you reviewed Mr. Depp's video depositions. Is that correct? The
Yes.
ones from November 10 through 12 of 2020 and December 14 of 2021. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Did you reach any conclusions about his cognitive symptoms, insight, and judgment in watching those?
So during the video deposition, what was readily apparent was a gentleman who had a significant delay in processing speed. And like I said, when you have a delay in processing speed, many other cognitive functions are going to follow. You're going to be impaired attention, concentration, memory. All that's going to happen. In terms of having to, the speech process, if you heard the deposition, the way the thoughts were conveyed were much more in the way of kind of disconnected, disjointed statements. It wasn't that they were not necessarily understandable, but they didn't have any coherent pattern until he was more structured by Ms. Bredehoff to kind of get to the point of the question, which happened throughout most of the deposition. And so you could see there that there was obviously some form of cognitive issue that should not be happening in someone in their mid-50s, and it probably due to the alcohol and substances.
What, if any, observations did you make about impulse control?
So during the deposition? Or,
yes, or,
okay.
and,
or any
and
other
on the
time?
record evidence either.
So again, I think that under the guise of not being acutely intoxicated, I think Mr. Depp was able to control much of his behavior, much of his thinking, even if it was aberrant or negative, he was able to control that. I think that once you start getting to the point of adding substances to that, that will set it over. If you saw the video, I think you all did, about the in the kitchen where there was smashing of glasses, slamming of cupboards, and yelling at Ms. Heard that you don't exist. And throughout the deposition of Dr. Kipper, Mr. Depp is firing him and rehiring him and yelling and screaming. And I do believe that a lot of it had to do with the interaction of, hey, we're trying to help you get sober, okay? And it is obviously something you are resisting, not ready for, not wanting. And so you saw a lot of yelling, a lot of acting out, if you would, which puts you on the state of, hey, this is a gentleman who has really significant trouble with delaying gratification, okay, delaying reward. And certainly one way to make that significantly worse is with substances. There's no question about that.
And you may have subsumed this in, but what, if anything, did you observe relating to erratic behavior based on the record evidence?
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, when you talk about erratic behavior, Dr. Kipper's deposition, I believe it was, where, and I think I made particular note of this only because I'm a psychiatrist myself. There was a very large ranting about Dr. Cowan, who was Ms. Heard's psychologist therapist. And the language, you can be dissatisfied with your provider. I have no problem with that. You could be dissatisfied and you have a right to go to wherever you want to go to. But the texting that were involved in this in terms of erratic behavior was disturbing in terms of the verbiage used, the phrases used. Am I free to use some of the language, or should I reserve that, Your Honor?
Go ahead.
I can?
Believe me, the jury's been hearing it.
Okay, all right, I want to make sure. I want to make sure. Okay, so it's something along the line that Dr. Kipper is an effing charlatan. He ought to.
Objection, hearsay.
It was,
He's entitled to rely on it and he's to give his examples.
He can talk about what he developed from the hearsay, but not repeat it himself.
He's entitled to give examples of it.
I'll
from
sustain
hearsay.
the objection.
Without giving the exact words that you recall.
oh, without giving the
Go ahead,
exact
just-
words?
Yeah.
Okay, so, I mean, without giving the exact words, it was basically vulgar language directed towards Dr. Cowan throughout multiple texts, multiple things that Dr. Cowan were doing in therapy. It was, like I said, it was without relaying it, the exact thing. I'm trying to be as accurate as I can. And I think at the end of it, I think he was also talking about that Dr. Cowan was filling Amber with positive thoughts or therapeutic.
Objection, hearsay.
I think he's keeping it more general and he's entitled to rely on.
Overruled.
Thank you.
So more along the line of giving Amber psychiatric jargon to put on him. And actually what I read and interpreted what Dr. Cowan's was getting blasted for was he was kind of teaching Amber how to misheard, how to use conflict resolution in a more appropriate manner and learning to express things more rationally rather than express things as irrational as they have been expressed. And for that, there were a lot of negativity being sworn at. So again, erratic behavior in terms of writing a text, but I have no problem with people being angry. Okay, none whatsoever. It's just the expressing of it and the continual ranting of it was very uncomfortable for me to read. But regardless, I think we have seen in terms of erratic behavior, much of the psychological and the physical maltreatment we talked about.
Objection beyond the scope of the question.
I don't agree.
Sustain. Next question.
Okay. Mr. Depp is 58 years old. Are the behaviors that you have been describing for the jury, are those typical and age-related?
No, so while I don't consider 58 years old, I'm 59, okay? I will tell you that the age-related changes that occur in humans are very erratic, hit and miss, meaning they'll occasionally be there. You may need a little bit more time to answer a question or pull things out of memory. You're just a little bit slow and a lot more inconsistently slow. You wouldn't describe what Dr. Blaustein's changes were or what I saw on the deposition attributed to age.
Dr. Spiegel, what is Seroquel?
Seroquel or quetiapine is actually an atypical antipsychotic, which is indicated for many things, including schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, adjunctive treatment for major depression. So it's indicated for a lot of things.
But what effects may it have? I mean, this is one of the drugs that Mr. Depp was taking,
Yes.
correct? It was a prescribed drug?
Yes.
Okay.
So-
please
So
explain.
the effect of Seroquel is it's very often used as a sleeping agent because it doesn't have a lot of the side effects that are associated with conventional antipsychotics, movement disorders, tardive dyskinesia, et cetera, or at least it's a very low risk of that. So people have used it off-label, physicians have used it off-label to help them sleep. The problem is the effect is very barbiturate-like, and it really knocks people out, or certainly if you use it at high enough doses, it can, okay? And the problem is it also has street value. So it's absolutely used on the street for that downer-like effect, and obviously it's a little bit more readily available because it's prescribed. So it does have that street value portion of it.
And Dr. Spiegel, what effect would this have on Mr. Depp based on the dosages he was taking?
So I think what you're looking at is
Objection, speculation.
Overruled.
Please continue.
what you will see in patients who have substance use disorders are people who unfortunately kind of wake up and fall asleep only through pharmacological assistance, meaning that their own circadian rhythms are no longer in control of that behavior. So you will take stimulants to quote unquote get you up in the morning, and then you will take things like quetiapine, Seroquel to knock you out. So basically what these are being used for is I'm going to get up and I'm going to get knocked out. And that's very characteristic of what would be actually legal prescribed substances. That's not illegal at all. That's very legal. And that's the seemingly what these medicines effect are on patients who have substance use disorder.
Dr. Spiegel, what is Neurontin?
So Neurontin is actually an anti-seizure medicine, which I think it's indicated for seizures, and it might be indicated for one chronic pain condition, although I can't swear that to you. That said, again, in a substance use disorder population, it has significant street value, and people who misuse opiates often supplement that with Neurontin because it has this anti-pain calming effect. So unfortunately, it also can cause respiratory suppression. And so when you use it with opiates, there are people that are unlucky enough to succumb to respiratory suppression as a result, but it has a very additive, calming effect that people use it for.
And what effect would this have on Mr. Depp in the dosage he was taking?
Again, I was looking for an objection. Okay, again, what it would do is have the street value of using it with the opiates. The advantage is you're using it with opiates, and it's because opiates in general, despite everything else it does, are calming. And you use it with it, it offers further calming, which is why doctors have been warned not to prescribe medications like gabapentin and opiates together unless under significant, strict following, because it can cause serious problems, such as death, respiratory suppression.
And Mr. Depp was also taking Adderall, correct?
Yes.
Can you please describe to the jury what that impact would have, and particularly in connection with the dosages? So
Adderall is a psychostimulant, which is prescribed relatively regularly for ADHD. The problem comes again when you shouldn't be prescribing or receiving Adderall when you're already misusing cocaine. Okay, you're now doubling your stimulant dosage here. And basically what you are talking about, again, it comes down to in the substance use disorder population, you are using it to stay awake, have energy, keep yourself going, getting high, getting energetic. And then the only way to kind of combat that, because you have this effect, is to kind of take downers during the day, and downers being anything that's calming. So anywhere from opiates prescription, anywhere from Neurontin, anywhere from Seroquel, all medications that are which are abusable. And so that's what this is going on. That's what the substance use disorder patient has. And it can't be given with someone using cocaine, because that's an extreme risk for death. You can't be given together.
And what, if any, effect would these drugs have if they were mixed with MDMA or cocaine?
So when you combine the two together, like I talked about before, there are effects where you are looking at, right, the predisposing traits of intimate partner violence. So jealousy, rapid mood changes, poor self-control, and to some degree condoning violence to a certain degree. When you combine them all together, you get this disinhibiting euphoriant effect from cocaine and Adderall. Then when you combine the two together, what happens, you get too much, and then you start getting irritable, you start getting agitated, okay? You start becoming suspicious, jealous, potentially disinhibited, psychotic, and these are the risks. And again, we're talking about not your average everyday use of these substances. We are talking about chronic use together. And we also know that alcohol and cocaine use independently increase significantly the risk of intimate partner violence. These aren't statistics I'm coming up with. They all depend, anywhere from reports up to 7 to 27-fold. So you are, quote unquote, colloquially playing with fire when you are talking about substances and intimate partner violence. You are playing with fire. And that's all of us.
And the substances that Mr. Depp was taking and the record evidence relating to those, did you draw any conclusions concerning whether he met this criteria or these risk factors?
So in terms of substance use disorder, when you look at it, so major role obligations not being fulfilled, don't have any evidence about operating under the influence or not. Social issues, especially disagreements and arguments with your spouse or family. Obviously, there was tolerance and dependent for the amount he was using, because if anyone is naive to these medications, most of us would be dead. Unsuccessful efforts, difficulty cutting back, using more than intended, giving up social, occupational obligations because this. I know there was right after the rehab on the island in Australia when Mr. Depp went out partying with Marilyn Manson. And
Objection beyond the scope of the question.
Actually, that's asking for the record evidence for this.
Sustain the objection. Next question.
Okay.
What other record evidence did you have supporting this?
Psychological, using despite the fact it causes known psychological, psychiatric, or medical effects. And I think that's been pretty well documented. So in this case, you're talking about someone who has a severe substance use disorder. I do want to emphasize, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that intimate partner violence and substance use disorders are two scourges in this country. They're two plagues. This is very serious stuff we're playing with. And when you are just getting someone closer and closer to the threshold.
Objection, Your Honor. Relevance.
This is highly relevant, Your Honor.
I'll overrule as to relevance.
Beyond the scope.
Go ahead.
Beyond the scope of the question?
Yes.
All right, I'll sustain that objection.
All right. Tell me more about the relationships between substance abuse and IPV, please.
Yeah, so again, that you are talking about this and you may be able to control the risk factors for any of us may be able to control the risk factors for IPV. Any of us might be able to, okay? When we're thinking and we're not disinhibited, not having these hyper intense emotions from substances. Once you add that to this mix, your brain can no longer do what it's supposed to do. And it's supposed to prevent you from doing this, quite frankly, because it's wrong.
Did you arrive at any conclusions concerning substance abuse and potential self-harm that may have led to Mr. Depp injuring his finger?
So I think the physician before me explained that pretty well, but I'll tell you that Mr. Depp has a history of self-injurious behavior, meaning cutting himself. Mr. Depp has a history of burning himself. I know when the actual event happened, there was texting to Dr. Kipper, paraphrasing, not saying exactly, that Amber and him got into a disagreement related to her wanting him to be sober. And then as a result of that, he said he got so angry, he cut the tip of his finger off. So if you're asking me, can someone who has, or have I seen, and can someone who cuts themselves, burns themselves, can cut a tip of their finger off with or without alcohol or cocaine or the rest? The answer is
Objection beyond the scope of the question.
Exactly what
Overruled.
Thank you. Please
Was
continue.
it overruled?
It was overruled.
Okay.
Go ahead.
So That is not a very far jump. I've certainly seen patients do a lot worse than that who started out with similar risk factors of, burning self and cutting self. I'm not going to get into the descriptions, but I've seen people do a lot worse than that.
Okay.
So the answer is yes.
Okay. I'm going to turn now specifically to intimate partner violence, and I know you've talked certainly about it. But can you tell the jury, please, a little bit more about intimate partner violence and what is included in that?
So the APA Task Force on Violence in the Family defined more or less this topic of domestic abuse, intimate partner violence, as recurrent abusive behavior by means of psychological, sexual, or physical maltreatment for the purpose of achieving control or maintaining power, authority, and control.
Can it include threats and intimidation?
It includes, so in the part of psychological abuse, which is done essentially as a means of emotionally and mentally hurting someone, but with the same end goal to achieve control, it can be destroying property, it could be financial, which is part of that, verbal outbursts, threats, intimidation, body language, all of that goes under the concept of psychological abuse. And you may be able to divide it, verbal, nonverbal, what's exactly emotional versus verbal, but they're all under that rubric, and they're all under the guise of maintaining control.
Do survivors of intimate partner violence experience mental health issues?
Can you repeat the question?
Do survivors of intimate partner violence experience mental health issues?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So survivors of intimate partner violence, and by the way, I should start out by saying we don't expect, in psychiatry, we don't expect our victims to be perfect. We don't expect our victims to be unscathed by what they've received. So starting with that, okay, it is not unusual as survivors to see substance use, substance abuse, substance-induced symptoms, chronic depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, or a subsyndromal post-traumatic stress disorder along the lines of battered wife syndrome, and some emotional unpredictability. And again, you are a victim here. You are a victim.
Do perpetrators typically seek treatment or counseling?
No. Perpetrators are not receiving counseling treatment. One, because they're going to be probably having to tell someone that they actually struck someone, which is what their thought is about the big problem that intimate partner violence is just hitting. Again, important, but not the sole part of it. So perpetrators very rarely will go into any type of formal counseling. Victims go into counseling. Victims are seeking actually couples counseling. Victims are seeking couples advice to try to repair what's happening. Okay? But in terms of actual perpetrators, no, they don't do that.
In your review of this case, is there record evidence of physical violence by Mr. Depp?
So,
Objection, Your Honor.
Would you like to
No
approach?
foundation.
Do you want to approach on it?